We often hear about the need for inclusion, but what happens when neurodivergent talent is consistently overlooked? How do we bridge the gap between untapped potential and meaningful employment? In this episode, Jacqueline Diaz joins me to explore how we can create pathways to work for neurodivergent individuals by fostering connections with supportive employers. We'll discuss what it takes to build a more equitable workforce and why the future of hiring depends on recognizing the value in everyone's abilities. Hi, I'm Dr. Theresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Think Differently. Today, we're going to tackle an exciting and important topic, and it's the future of neuroinclusive hiring. And while we don't have a crystal ball, we do know this. As workplaces and communities evolve, the need to embrace neurodivergent talent is becoming more apparent. So leaders and employees alike are looking for better ways to make this workplace experience better for everyone. Today with us is Jacqueline Diaz. Very excited about this. She's the co-owner of Strategic Talent Acquisition and founder of the Stevens Spectrum Career Project in New York City. She's deeply immersed in this work and is very passionate about autism inclusion. And I'm just really excited to hear her perspective as a recruiter and her thoughts on really what it takes to create these inclusive hiring practices that will really work. I want to explore some things that companies can do better, how technology fits the picture, and just how we can welcome neurodivergent talent. So I just want to thank you for being here, Jacqueline, and thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
I am excited too. So maybe let's start, because my audience may or may not be familiar with you. Tell me why you're so passionate about the autism inclusion space when it comes to talent acquisition.
Well, aside from being neurodivergent myself, I was late diagnosed in my early 20s with ADHD and OCD. So growing up, I know I thought a little bit differently when it came to my studies. When people were not raising their hands, I'm like looking around like, why aren't you raising your hand? And it was just like, should I raise my hand? If I raise my hand, then everybody's going to know that I don't understand. So it was just that anxiety of trying to figure things out on my own, or going home to my genius sister because she is a genius. She's the genius of the family, and telling her to kind of explain things step by step to me. But aside from that, I have an autistic nephew. He's 29 years old now. And when I started the recruiting agency, he approached me and he said, can you get me a job? And of course I said, absolutely. If I can't get you a job, I was being a little cocky, then I, suck as a recruiter. And lo and behold, I hate to say this, but he could have really said you suck as a recruiter and an aunt, because it was very difficult. And not only it was difficult to place him in employers, but I was just trying to reach out to agencies here in New York that do deal with the neurodivergent and help them. And like other organizations and nonprofits, they either don't have funding, but don't have enough staff, and they're volunteer run. So a lot of them, most of them were backlogged, and it was a 30 to 90 day intake, just for the intake, not to prepare a resume, not to give him an interview. It was just for the intake. So I got frustrated, and the hot blood that I am, I said, I want to do something about it. And I started the Stevens Spectrum Career Project, and Steven is, of course, my nephew.
Love it. And so you are like, I can do this. I can place anybody. And then you tried to place him and it was difficult. What were some of the barriers you were experiencing that surprised you? Because obviously you know so much more now, but you were just a recruiter. You're like, I can place anybody. What were the barriers that surprised you at the beginning that have since informed your entity?
So there are things within the hiring process that didn't, it's not that I wasn't aware of. It's just that it just smacked me in my face. Like, oh, wow, how did I miss this? I knew this, but I kind of like really didn't go over this all the time. And it was simple little things, right? Because when you do recruitment, it's just not like I found a candidate and here's an employer, you're looking for an administrative assistant. Here's an administrative assistant, let's match you up, that's it. That's not the process. You have to go through to the employer and see what their company culture is, what exactly they want in an administrative assistant, how many years they want, what type of background are they looking for, if they're looking for a degree, if they're not looking for a degree. And then you go to the candidate. And what is that candidate looking for in a company? What is that candidate looking for in a company culture? And when I didn't see those things matching, I said, what is going on? Because I'm not telling employers, hey, I have this neurodivergent nephew, will you hire him? It was, I want to make that connection without anybody being biased. So I started looking at, number one, the job descriptions that the employers were giving me, and they were very non-inclusive. It's just like, must have great communication skills. Okay, great. What does that mean? Because everybody communicates differently. Why don't we reword that to must communicate to the best of their ability in the way that that person can do it, or something of the sort, right? They were very lengthy. It didn't really get to the point. So I really had to hone down with the employers to say exactly what is it that you're looking for. And then on the candidate side, which was my nephew, I had to say, hey, we don't really have a resume for you aside from the jobs that you did while you were in District 75 here in New York. District 75 is the Department of Special Education. And they did help him to secure some retail jobs, which was just part of the curriculum. But aside from that, what is it that I can showcase for you? And there wasn't really much, unfortunately, because at the time that my nephew was diagnosed years ago, right, autism was very new and no one knew a lot about it, right? And not only that, it's when my nephew aged out, there wasn't a lot of opportunities for him to go to college, because there were college programs, but the college programs were quote unquote alternative learning. So financial aid wasn't covering that. So he did not have the opportunity to go to college because we just couldn't afford it. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars that we could not afford. So he wasn't able to go into a vocational program because, again, the vocational programs that would take him, there was a waiting list, or there was just some agencies that kind of, unfortunately, used gave those spots to the parents who were donating the most. And we weren't there either. So what skills did he have to present? And unfortunately, he really didn't have any. So I wanted to place him in an agency where they can help him, number one, get the soft skills that he needed to interview, and number two, get some skills so he can either do administrative, retail, or what it was that he was passionate about. Because I do want to emphasize that it's not that he was really looking for a job because, hey, I really, really want to work and work a 9 to 5, but we take these little things for granted, right? Like working for granted. But he just wanted to find some purpose. He was home and he was not in a class. He was not contributing, and he just wanted to find purpose. And I just wanted to help him do that.
It's, as you're telling the story, I just hear barrier after barrier, because we talk about it in recruiting, regardless of neurodivergence, like especially when you're new to work, Where do you get the experience? How do you build that exposure? And if you're in a retail job, but for whatever reason, you're really good at numbers or like data entry, like that doesn't translate. So when you started to think about, okay, he has skills and I see the gap of where he's trying to go, where did you begin to start thinking about like, how can we build this muscle? Because the agencies are pretty much saying, we're at full vacancy. You're going to have to wait in line for an indefinite amount of time. So then you were like, we have to do something. So talk me through the we have to do something. Because I think your story is really going to help people open doors about how they could begin to do something.
Yeah, so when I started really digging in, right, my nephew has this mind that is incredible, right? So he will meet you today and he will know, like 20 years later, he will really know your name, know that you were wearing a white shirt, know that you had your hair curly. If you guys had coffee, what you had in your coffee. He just has that type of mind. And when it comes to that type of mind, it's a lot of memorization. It's a lot of, okay, organizational skills that he has. So maybe working in a McDonald's might be good, but he didn't really want to do that, right? Retail was pretty good for him because it was just like sorting out numbers and prices and, being in a stock room. That might help. Something in the administrative where he can organize things from A to Z. That would be great. But the thing is that even though he had that mind, that's not something that he wanted to do. So he wanted to do more of arts. He wanted to hone his skills on painting and things with his hands. So how it ended up with him is he was living here in New York City, and they decided to move upstate to Saratoga. So he did not get a job here in New York City, but we did find him his passion, which is, he makes like these beautiful art pieces right now. And he goes every single week into these art classes and he paints. He does stained glass, and it just makes him really happy. So when I ask him again, like, do you want me to get you a job? He's like, no, I'm good. Because he found what he was looking for.
Purpose.
Purpose, yes.
Which I think a lot of people forget that beyond the sustainment of life, like bills and house, then a lot of us work for purpose. So now you start this organization, you're helping other people beyond your nephew. Where did you start to really think about, okay, how can we begin to address this at a scale? Because you decided, I love my nephew, I'm going to help him, but now there's so many others like him and the numbers are growing. So how did you pivot, and where do you really focus your energy where you're seeing success?
So the organization, while we do job placement, right? Our main focus is training, daily living workshops, and mentorship. So the mentorship piece comes in any of those avenues, right? So when we speak about training, it's training them. Let's say that we have like this horse program in collaboration with a trainer in Belmont Racetrack, where an individual who is passionate about animal care and horses starts out as a hot walker, and a hot walker walks the horse around, warms him up in order for the horse exercisers to come and work with them, right? So once they have a good handle on the horse, they are able to pick a track. And one of the tracks is either horse grooming or horse exerciser. They can become a jockey manager, or they can pick a 2-year track to become within the 2 years a horse trainer. Now, this is they're paid for it. They have free housing, and they also have free medical and dental. Now, this program, why I love it so much, is because not only do they do something that they're passionate about and learn something and get paid for it, But in the event that they ever decide to leave that program and want to go elsewhere to, a smaller horse farm or anything like that to care for horses, they have that skill. So it's not only about, while we do focus on workforce, we want them to be able to have a skill that they are passionate about, that they love, because not everybody will decide to go on and pursue a job, and not everybody will tell us, to place them in a job, but we want them to be able to learn a skill that will give them that purpose. And then we back it up with the mentorship. So once they're placed, whether it's in a training program or in a job, we don't want them to feel alone. So they'll be able to reach out to their mentor, whether it's once a month, once a week, or as needed, to say, hey, I need this extra support. How can you support me? And how, like, let's say they want to approach someone in HR. How do I do that? And can you assist me with those things?
And what I love is you're building the skilled, you're building a pathway, and we don't talk about trades enough, right? Like that, it's an alternative path to education and fulfillment. And I love how you talked about just this one area of working in the equestrian field. Like that's huge. And so this is how you're doing it. And I think just based on your story, your nephew inspired it. It's like, here's your skills, but my passion is art. And so you're like, so how do we cultivate your passion into a path? And so I really like that passion to purpose. That's really exciting. And so you have all this going on. And then we're all talking about the future of neuroinclusion. And then there's the flip side. So you're doing a lot of hypercare on the neurodivergent individual, but then we have the other side, the people that are hiring these folks or working with them. Where are you seeing the breakthroughs coming in there? Because somebody's got to be willing to give the opportunity as well. So how do you start breaking the ice on that side?
So it's twofold, right? The first part of it is that a lot of employers are figuring out that, hey, we don't have to go outside and try to hire. Let's be newer inclusive. We already have neurodivergence in our workforce, right? Because it's somebody is there. Like when I was working in corporate, no one knew that I was neurodivergent. I don't just go around saying my diagnosis because, number one, I didn't think it's anybody's business, and number two, I did a lot of masking, and that's what's going on a lot, especially when in the workforce, there's a lot of people masking, trying to mimic other traits that other people do just so you can fit in. So you don't kind of like stand out as a sore thumb of like, oh, okay, this girl is not getting it, or, she's a little different. So there are employers that are finding out that, yes, we need to do something because we already have neurodivergent, or on the other side, it's we need to educate ourselves, and we need to make our hiring process more inclusive. And that seems very, very broad, but there are things that people can do to make their hiring process more inclusive. I think that behavioral questions, while they're great for some people, it's not great for everybody, and it shouldn't be the end all of be all. There should be some other forms that employers should be interviewing people. They should be given the option, whether it's virtual or in person. They should be given the option of, if it's a hands-on job, to show me instead of me interviewing you and going through these painful questions. Show me a portfolio, because if that's the work that you're going to be doing, I'd rather see it rather than you sit down uncomfortably and having to tell me. Or sometimes, like a lot of behavioral questions are, tell me about a time and how did you feel about that? When, myself as a neurodivergent, I'm still trying to process the first question. So it's just like, we need to really make it inclusive for everybody. That way we don't have to try to say, somebody come in and you say, well, are you neurodivergent? Well, no, we don't have to do that. We just need to really, really make the hiring process more inclusive. That way no one has to disclose their diagnosis, because you don't have to.
You shouldn't have to. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about how much more I personally enjoyed my younger years when you were trying to get into schools or do things and you got to write essays. And how much more I would rather write why I would be the best fit rather than somebody rifle off questions, which may sound ironic for those listening because we're talking and doing a podcast. But it's the idea that there's a lot of things that go on in those interviews. I teach a class on HR and talent management. And I was telling my students that somebody gave an example about, well, they were fumbling in the interview, so they weren't going to be a good fit because how would they handle, questions coming in from clients? I go, you are not under the same level of anxiety. And the risk of the conversation is completely different when you're on the job and somebody asks you how to find the second floor versus when somebody's rifling you to answer these questions, which I think is an interesting thing because when you're under stress, your memory and recall are slowed anyway, even if you're not neurodivergent, and it just compounds. So you could ask somebody like, what did you have for dinner last night? And they're so nervous, they can't even retrieve that. So I'm not a fan of talking interviews, but that seems to be the baseline for everything. And I feel really bad for folks. I think it's just a really interesting barrier that we have to overcome. You were talking about how you feel like more people are getting to be neuroinclusive and that there's neurodivergence in their midst. And I do think there is considerable amount of neurodivergence in their midst. But I want to go there. I'm going to go there with you. 15, 20 years ago when I started all this, the problem statement was for autism. This is how we started, guys. So sorry, my ADHD friends. We see you. But the diagnostic criteria was different. So those that are called autistic today were part of 5 different categories. And I'm not going to go through that lesson today. But the problem statement we were talking about was with a population that didn't get missed because those numbers were captured by the CDC by the age of 8. And what's interesting is those with level 1 autism, that used to be Asperger's, guys, that wasn't even typically diagnosed to the age of 10 or 12. So that's not late diagnosis issues. It's just when those issues started to become more problematic because they were less problematic when you were younger. And I think about it, when you're in school, teachers are coaching you, stand in line, do it this way. Parents are coaching you. Then you hit around 10, 12, 13, and people stop telling you how to interact with your peers and it all starts to fall apart. And then we were able to find you. But that early data was like the classic autism groups without intellectual impairment. And so I want to just ask you your thoughts. These are our opinions. I feel like there is a level of neuroinclusion that's acceptable. And the problem statement that I've been working for is getting better, but they're still on the cusp. And why I say that is if you're already employed and you found out you're neurodivergent, you're actually not the population we were talking about. So do you feel we're solving for our original problem statement of these usually autistic individuals, sometimes gifted, profoundly gifted, not school level gifted, but genius gifted, where they do present so differently that it isn't their intelligence. Do you feel we're making headway there?
Yeah.
Because that was my original population. And with the DSM-5 changes, I feel like I'm losing my population a bit in the data. Are we making progress with them, do you think?
Unfortunately, and this is my opinion, I don't think so. While it seems that we're making headway with the other, right? It's just very little. We have a long way to go all around.
Yeah. And I only call it out autistic friends because Dan Aykroyd is a perfect example of somebody that came out and said, I'm autistic. He has Asperger's. Mm-hmm. But he's employed. So, did he have barriers? Absolutely. Did you have struggles? Absolutely. I don't want to diminish the struggles we have in the workplace, But I do want to call out that there's a subset of people, and I've coached many of them, where they do go to college for whatever reason. They're taking the same classes as everybody else. Some have masters and double doctorates, and they still cannot keep a job. And so that's where I think it really turns the conversation to what you were talking about. What are you hiring for? Because if it's skills, they've actually demonstrated skills. I always like to say that, the doctorate at MIT is the doctorate at MIT. There's no special autistic doctorate. So if they could do the work there, what is holding you up thinking they can't do the work here? And it's the social component. At least that's my opinion. And so that's one of the things I'm trying to bust the myth on. Like, if we have people that feel like they have to mask at work today, but they function with stress and anxiety, not good, and they're still out there saying it's getting better, but it's not great, then we know we're still like not ready. And I hate saying that out loud, because my problem statement is growing up and going to be ready to enter the workforce. And it concerns me that there's these pockets of hope, right? Like, we look at some of the bigger tech companies, some of the government agencies, it felt like there were some groups that went all in on technology. But then I talked to you, and I talked to Danny Combs a few weeks ago, where we're like, but we can do trades, we can do other work, we can do art. Like, we're not all coders, we're not all computer scientists. Like,
Yes.
do you think that it was easier to go to computers because of the nature of the work doesn't always require that interaction? So they're like, I don't care if you're not, extroverted, just go sit in the corner and fix the coding problem. Do you think that maybe that's why things are slower in the other domains, because of the typical expectation of conversation?
I think that it's also misconceptions, right? Because when people really think back, like at least back in the days, right? If you said, like, when my nephew was growing up, that he was autistic, everybody automatically thought, like, he could count toothpicks like Rain Man. It's like, not everybody's Rain Man.
Right.
Not everybody is great with numbers. So it could be the misconceptions that everybody's great with numbers, or that, they can sit in a cubicle and not have to interact with everybody, which is not the case. Because although there are people who suffer from some social cues and interactions that they wish that they had, and they're working on that, there's others that thrive in social aspects, right? So that's why it's called the spectrum, which, by the way, everybody hates that word now, but it is a spectrum, right? Because everybody is different. My nephew is pretty social, but the problem with my nephew is he's 6 foot tall. He's Hispanic with dark skin, and when he tries to socialize, he speaks very proper. So people think that he speaks so proper. People think that he's making fun of them, or or if he tries to talk to a child, he must be some kind of pervert. So it's unfortunate, but he's social. But things like that, the reaction that society gives him, it kind of like he's taken back and doesn't understand why people react to him the way that they do.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we worry about as our son gets older. It's an interesting thing where he is introverted, like he likes his time to read, and he doesn't want to be like around big groups of people when he's trying to work or focus. But he also does have a strong desire, like, audience, autistic people want friends too, right? They just present differently. And sometimes being present is different. Like, I call it our introverted time, where we're side by side, but we're both reading a book. But that's socializing for me and my son sometimes, right? But he likes to talk just like anybody else. Your nephew, right, is just trying to make the connection. And it's the different presentation that causes, they aren't causing the barrier, but our interpretation, society's interpretation of what that behavior means, becomes the barrier.
Yeah, and within the workforce too, whether it's during an interview or you have someone that is neurodivergent, they might not give eye contact. Oh, so that person is doesn't work well with others, or they don't shake somebody's hand the way that you want it. The handshake wasn't strong enough, or he just didn't want to shake the hand, so I'm not going to hire him, or he just doesn't work well with others, so let's just stick him in that corner. And that's unfortunately where we need to make headway, because we're not there yet. We have a long way to go, unfortunately.
I want to share a story with you that I was working with someone that was talking about how they had a disruptive neurodivergent employee. And so, as you would say, well, what do you mean by disruptive, right? Like,
Yeah.
describe that disruption. And so, what they would convey is that they would talk about things that of their interest, and they're like, and they go on and on about it, and it's really disruptive because they're bothering the other people with it. And I said, so do they talk all day about this? They're like, no, it's just they'll bring it up, and they almost said the phrase, but they stopped themselves. So I finished it. I said, they don't care because they're not interested in the topic. And of course they did not answer it smartly. And I said, so let me ask a question. Do you prohibit social conversation in the office? And she's like, no. I go, so throughout the day, people are talking about the local sports game or maybe the show they heard on, like they talk about things besides work. They're like, yeah. I go, does that person engage in those conversations? They're like, no. I go, could it be that the majority of everybody on your team has similar interests? And when this person talks about their interest because it's something you don't understand or you don't care about, that's disruptive because it doesn't fit your flow. And they went, oh. I go, so here's the thing. We either
It's sad.
learn to appreciate humans of various interests, and maybe the neurodivergent person can try to be part of the pool, but maybe you could also maybe show some interest in the Dungeons and Dragons they played this weekend. I don't mean to be stereotypical, but I wanted to find something that's not as typical, but fairly common.
Yeah.
I go, or you just prohibit conversation away from the workplace, because I don't think you can call one person disruptive because they're trying to make a connection, because they're talking about a topic. And so I love that story, not because it happened, but because it's a great way to isolate on when you say, oh, they're annoying, or it's a chatty Cathy. Are they really talking too much, or is it just they're talking about something you aren't interested in? And then flip the script. Do you have a connection with that person? And I think if leaders can start looking at that, like, are we building community or are we building culture? Because a lot of times, and I love your thoughts on this, talent acquisition person, people are always like, they're not a cultural fit. And oftentimes I don't think that has anything to with culture, because culture is about how we work and the way we work. They confuse it with community, right? That's why people want to go back to the office. They're like, well, we don't have our potlucks. That's not culture, that's community.
Exactly.
And so are you focused on finding people like you to like build an extension of community, or are you actually worried about, or
Yes.
are you actually focused on a culture that makes the work happen? Like, why are you even coming to work? And so I just think it's an interesting conversation to start thinking about, like, I'm not saying all neurodivergent people this way, but I do think we have a new generation coming in where they want to come to work and then they want to go home. And that doesn't mean they're not a cultural fit. That just means they're not looking to build community at work. Do you see that, where people like, they're worried about community more than culture?
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard things similar to that before, where it's, when Game of Thrones was all the buzz, how everyone in the office would speak about the Game of Thrones, and like one individual didn't want to engage, but would go really hone in on just like one topic that nobody else was interested in. And I think that it's really sad, because you kind of alienate that person, right? And it's also sad because if somebody decides that what that person is doing is offensive and goes to HR, they have to actually, sit down with that person and have an uncomfortable conversation that that, yeah, the topic you're bringing up is offending other people when it really isn't. So it's just such a touchy and sad way to work. And I think that the most important part and the most important giveaway here, takeaway here, is that education is key. And what I mean by education is one of the things that the Stephen Spectrum Career Project does is when we partner with employers to that they say, yeah, we'll hire neurodivergent as they come in and things. We educate them on how things may be different, because if you make accommodations for someone with a physical disability, this is how you make accommodations for someone who is neurodivergent. These are the things that may be a little bit different that you should educate your staff on. That way they're aware that, yes, that person might not make eye contact, and this person might not shake your hand, and this person might say something that talk about a sport that you never even heard of. But, just be a person, be a human being, and just understand that everybody is different. It's all about, and it's not even, at this point, it's not even about whether they're neurodivergent or not. It's about just learning and to live with other people's differences.
Live with those differences, respect those differences.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
When I think about neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, one of the things that I really think is our biggest barrier is leaders want to just say, tell me what to do and do it. Like it's a tactical thing. Like I put in an elevator, or we have different desk setups. So I can give you, they want it to just be like this one and done thing. And the thing that I keep saying, and you have been saying the entire time, is this is not a one and done thing. Being intentional, being empathetic, listening, caring, being respectful, that is the human element. And for this to work, I don't think you can just create a little checklist and say, oh, here's our accommodations. And then people just kind of go back to what they were doing. That's a culture shift, right? That's really changing things. And so as I was talking about this human element, we talked about tech rules and the stereotype, but then I think about we're using more technology. Like managers are using technology to find people, possibly even making hiring decisions. What are you seeing there? Because we know tech is a growing trend. Like almost every resume goes through some sort of system.
It drives me crazy because when we speak about hiring, right? What do we name those departments? It's human resources. We need humans to actually get back to hiring. We need a human to connect with, because we need a human to read the resume. These ATS systems are doing us a disservice. It's crazy because I read a feed on LinkedIn how a person, she just put in her resume, and within seconds she said that she got a rejection, and it's because it went through an ATS system, and the keywords or whatever it is that they asked her, probably it didn't have the keywords that they were looking for. It didn't have what happened to that human element, because you can look at someone's resume. Like when I look at someone's resume, I don't only look at keywords that the employer is looking for, right? I read through it. I look to see, has this person been bouncing around? Because if this person's been bouncing around, I'm not going to present them, because chances are that they're going to leave this job too, right? I want to look at longevity. I want to see their skills. I want to see the bullet points that say, okay, this says that you were administrative assistant. They're actually looking for a project manager. But on here, it actually says that you did some project manager work. You were just called an administrative assistant, but you were actually doing some other stuff, because it's also all these different titles too with jobs. You can somebody can be some sort of specialist when somebody else can be a manager, and they're doing the same thing. But there's also all these fancy words and titles that every company gives their own job. And if you're putting it through these systems, it's trying to read out these certain things that you put in, and you may miss out on a great person. And it's not only that, it's not only the resume. but it's the decision making as well. Like I get people approaching me all the time saying, "Hey, do you want help? AI helping you pick a candidate?" No, I don't want AI helping me pick a candidate. I think that I can pick a candidate because I want to speak to the candidate. That's the best way. That's the best way to find out if this person actually works, right? If that person's going to work is doing an assessment, if the person is neurodivergent and they don't speak, they don't really want to speak very well, but because interviewing is not their thing. I want to see something else. They can send me, like I said, a portfolio. They can send me a video. They can send me something that they have done. AI is not going to do that for you. And this is why a lot of people are saying that there's so many jobs out there, but it doesn't seem that anybody's getting called back. And it's because technology is what's being taken over by a lot of these offices. And I mean, it's taken a real long time for people to get hired nowadays.
It's taking a really long time. And I can hear somebody going, well, but there's a course on LinkedIn that'll tell you how to modify your stuff. And there's some coaching that'll say, just change the title of your name and, intersperse the keywords in your resume. And I'm purposely calling that out in a cheeky way because friends, neurodivergent people,
exactly.
There's a subset of them that will not do that because they see it as lying or they see it as fabrication, right? Like, this is who I am. This is what I did. And while I can tell you that I know an administrative assistant often does project management work and event planning and coordinating and can probably move to a lot of jobs, to convince some neurodivergent individuals who are administrative assistants to change that title to administrative assistant and event coordination, they would never do it. They would never do it because it's not what their actual title was. And so this whole concept, like I say it all the time, if you can take a course on how to churn a phrase to get the interview, then you're not actually interviewing for skills.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, for instance, my nephew, right? He's very matter of fact. When it comes to, a lot of jokes fall flat because he's just like, I don't get it kind of thing. So when it comes to like what you just said, if you would tell him to change something, he would like, why? I don't understand why I would have to do that. And it's not that, it's not to say that they're more honest than anybody else. It's not that. We're not trying to say that. What I'm trying to say is that, and I'm putting my nephew as an example, he is so matter of fact. He is so like black and white sometimes that it's just, I don't get why I need to do that, because if this is what I did, why would I say that and you can explain it in all different kinds of ways. Why would I say that I did something else if this was my title? Right. And then when it comes to all of this, I just think if you're taking the time to take courses, if you're taking the time to figure out AI, if you're taking the time to do all that, just take the time and just do the work. And just instead of using technology and trying to learn more about the technology of how to put the human into technology, just do it. Just speak to the people. Just reach out to them. And if you need to use AI for certain things, there are certain things that you may want to use AI for, just like maybe organizing it into your system. That way they know that, auto reject a person if they don't have the master degree, that's fine. There are things that you can do, but if you're taking out the time and you're spending hours out of time just learning about a technology that's going to do that job for you, you're actually spending more time doing that than actually just putting the human aspect in human resources and talent acquisition. And I just think that we're losing that human element in hiring. And if that happens, then completely, I think that we're going to be in trouble.
I agree. And so I think it's an interesting thing, and I think it's a good way to start wrapping up our conversation today, that the human element is what has caused the barriers, but it's also the human element that is the solution. So With our audience today, if they could take one thing away from this conversation, what do you really want them to focus on?
I want everybody to focus on just that human feeling. Don't forget that human feeling. Don't forget that connection with everybody, right? Everybody thinks differently. We aren't talking about neurodiversity here, right? But aside from that, we all think differently. We're all different people. We all come from different cultures. And it's just embracing that, that people think differently. There's going to be different opinions. There's going to be different stories that people are going to say. Not everybody is into the Game of Thrones. Not everybody is into Star Trek. If somebody tells you a story that might not be interesting, humor them every once in a while. You might learn something. But I think that the takeaway is just remember that we're all different, and that's what makes this world so beautiful. Because if we all dressed alike and thought alike and did everything alike, it would be so boring. So if anything that you can take away today, it's just remember that we're different and to embrace that.
I'm going to embrace that.
I love it.
So Jacqueline, I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. If people want to learn more about your work with the project or maybe even to think about how they might be able to expand in their areas, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
I am on LinkedIn, Jacqueline Diaz, or you can contact me via, I guess, my email, Jacqueline@thestephenproject.org. And I can, whether it is that you want to use our recruiting agency, I can give you the information on that if you reach out to me, or you can just reach out to me to learn more about the Stephen Project. And the Stephen Project is with a V, not PH.
I'm just really moved that you took a challenge and turned it into an inspirational story, which has turned into a meaningful path for so many to find work, and an exemplar that other people can really start to look at and think about how they can help people really achieve their potential too. I just want to thank you for all the good work you're doing. It really matters and it means a lot. And I'm so glad that you're a partner in this journey with me.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun. Thank you for having this podcast and bringing all this information that is much needed to the light. I had a blast, and I hope that people who are listening could get inspired in some way.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank Audio Work Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.